The wagon wheels creaked to a halt, and Emma's heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Dust settled around the small convoy of settlers, painting everything in shades of amber and gold as the sun dipped toward the western horizon. She pressed her palm against the rough wooden planks, peering through the gaps at the vast Dakota territory stretching endlessly before them. This land was nothing like the green valleys of Pennsylvania she had left behind 6 months ago. Her father's voice rang out, sharp with authority. "Circle the wagons. Women and children to the center." The urgency in his command made her stomach twist into knots. She had heard stories around campfires, whispered tales that made grown men check their rifles twice before sleeping. Now those stories felt far too real. Emma climbed down from the wagon, her worn boots sinking into the prairie grass. At 19, she had imagined her journey west would lead to adventure and possibility. Her mother had died 2 winters past, and her father had decided a fresh start was what they needed. But standing here, surrounded by endless sky and unknown dangers, Emma wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. The attack came without warning. One moment, the settlers were preparing their evening meal. The next, whoops and cries filled the air as riders appeared on the ridge like shadows materializing from the earth itself. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat as she watched the Lakota warriors descend upon their camp. Their horses moved with supernatural grace, and the riders seemed to be part of the animals themselves, flowing as one entity across the landscape. Gunshots cracked through the air. Men shouted. Women screamed. Emma's father grabbed her arm, trying to pull her toward the dubious safety of the circled wagons, but chaos had already consumed everything. She stumbled, her skirt catching on a wagon wheel, and in that moment of imbalance, strong hands seized her from behind. She screamed, twisting in the iron grip that held her. The world spun as she was lifted onto a horse, her captor's arm like a band of steel around her waist. The smell of leather and sage filled her nostrils as the horse wheeled around, carrying her away from everything she knew. Her father's anguished cry cut through the mayhem, but it grew fainter with each thundering hoofbeat. Terror consumed her completely. Emma had heard what happened to white women taken by Indians. The stories were always the same, always ending in tragedy or madness. She struggled against her captor's hold, but it was useless. His strength was absolute, and the horse moved too fast for her to risk throwing herself off. The camp disappeared behind them, swallowed by the rolling hills. The band of warriors rode in formation, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Emma's captor said nothing, but she could feel the solid presence of him at her back, his breathing steady despite the wild ride. She forced herself to observe everything, to stay present despite her fear. If she was going to survive this, she needed to be smart. As darkness fell, they reached a camp nestled in a valley beside a winding creek. Teepees stood in a circle, smoke rising from cooking fires into the purple sky. Women and children emerged to watch the warriors return, their faces showing curiosity but not the bloodlust Emma had been taught to expect. Her captor dismounted in one fluid motion, then reached up to pull her down. Emma's legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. She stared up at the man who had taken her, seeing him clearly for the first time. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face marked with paint and strong features that spoke of authority. His eyes, dark as midnight, studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she refused to show weakness. She met his gaze, lifting her chin in defiance even as her whole body trembled. He said something in his language, words she could not understand. When she did not respond, he reached toward her face. Emma flinched backward, her breath coming in short gasps, certain this was the moment her fate would be sealed. She had nowhere to run, no one to help her. She was completely at his mercy. His hand rose higher, and she trembled violently, squeezing her eyes shut. Emma braced herself for violence, for pain, for the horror she had been taught to expect from savages. Her whole body went rigid as his hand drew closer. She could feel the warmth of his palm near her face, and her mind raced through desperate prayers and final thoughts. This was how her story would end, alone and afraid in a hostile land, far from anyone who loved her. But the blow never came. Instead, she felt the gentlest touch against her hair. Her eyes flew open in shock as she realized what he was doing. The Lakota warrior was running his fingers through a loose strand of her hair, his expression filled with wonder rather than malice. Her hair, which had escaped from its usual bun during the chaos, fell past her shoulders in waves the color of autumn wheat. In the firelight, it gleamed like molten gold. He spoke again, his voice low and measured. An older woman stepped forward from the gathering crowd, her weathered face showing wisdom and patience. She gestured for Emma to follow, but Emma stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. The warrior released her hair and nodded to the woman, issuing what sounded like instructions. The older woman approached Emma slowly, the way one might approach a frightened animal. "Come," the woman said in heavily accented English. "You will not be harmed." Emma stared at her in amazement. "You speak English?" "Some words. I am called Winona. You come with me now." She reached out a hand, her movements gentle despite the command in her voice. Emma glanced back at the warrior who had captured her, but he had already turned away, walking toward a group of men gathered near the largest teepee. She had no choice but to follow Winona. The older woman led her to a teepee on the eastern edge of the circle. Inside, it was surprisingly warm and organized. Buffalo robes lay carefully arranged, and parfleches decorated with intricate beadwork lined the walls. A small fire burned in the center, its smoke rising through the opening at the top. Winona gestured for Emma to sit and handed her a wooden bowl filled with stew. Emma's stomach growled despite her fear. She had not eaten since morning, and the rich smell of the food made her mouth water. But she hesitated, suspicion and terror still coursing through her veins. What if it was poisoned? What if this kindness was just a prelude to something worse? Winona seemed to understand her hesitation. The older woman took the bowl, sipped from it herself, then handed it back. "Eat. You are safe here." Emma took the bowl with shaking hands and brought it to her lips. The stew was delicious, flavored with herbs she did not recognize, and she found herself eating ravenously. As she ate, Winona explained in her broken English that the warrior who had taken Emma was called Mtawanagi, which meant bear ghost. He was a chief among his people, a man of great honor and courage. Winona's words painted a picture so different from the bloodthirsty savage Emma had expected that she struggled to reconcile the two images. "Why did he take me?" Emma asked, setting down the empty bowl. "What does he want from me?" Winona's eyes crinkled with something that might have been amusement. "Your hair. He has never seen such color. Like the prairie grass when it dies in autumn, he says. Like captured sunlight." She paused, studying Emma's face. His wife died 2 winters past. His daughter, 3 summers before that. Both had dark hair, like all our people. He sees your hair and thinks of them somehow. I do not understand his heart, but I know he means you no harm. Emma's mind reeled. She had been taken not for the violent purposes she had feared, but because of her hair? It seemed impossible, yet the evidence supported Winona's words. Mtawanagi had touched her hair with reverence, not aggression. Still, she was a captive in a hostile camp, surrounded by people whose language she did not speak and whose customs she did not understand. "Will he let me go? Return me to my father?" Emma's voice broke on the last word. Her father must be frantic with worry. If he was still alive. The thought that he might have been killed in the raid made her chest tighten with grief. Winona's expression grew serious. "I do not know. The council will decide. Your people were crossing through our lands without permission. You take what is not yours, kill the buffalo for sport, bring sickness and death wherever you go. Many here want war." The days blurred together in a strange rhythm that Emma had never known before. Each morning, she woke to the sounds of the camp coming alive around her, children laughing, women calling to one another, men preparing for the day's hunting or councils. Winona had become her constant companion, teaching her the basics of survival in this new world. Emma learned to scrape hides, to preserve meat, to identify which plants were safe to eat and which would bring sickness or death. But it was Mtawanagi who occupied her thoughts most frequently. The chief watched her from a distance, never approaching too closely, never threatening. Yet his presence was constant, like a shadow she could not shake. Several times each day, she would feel eyes upon her and turn to find him observing her with that same intense, unreadable expression. It unnerved her, this silent scrutiny, yet she sensed no malice in it. On the 4th day of her captivity, he approached while she was gathering water from the creek. Emma's heart began to race as she saw him walking toward her, his movements deliberate and unhurried. She straightened, clutching the water bladder to her chest like a shield. When he stopped a few feet away, she forced herself to meet his eyes, refusing to cower despite the fear that still lived in her bones. Mtawanagi studied her for a long moment, then lifted his hand slowly, telegraphing his intention. Emma held her breath as his fingers once again found the golden strands of her hair, which she had begun wearing loose as the pins that had held it had been lost during the capture. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, and she saw something in his face that she had not expected to see, sorrow. He spoke in Lakota, his voice deep and resonant. Though she understood nothing of his words, she heard the pain beneath them. His fingers moved through her hair as though he were touching something precious and fragile, something he had lost and found again in unexpected form. Emma stood very still, barely breathing, as understanding slowly dawned on her. This man was not her enemy. He was simply someone drowning in grief, reaching out for any lifeline he could find. Her unusual hair had become that lifeline, a connection to memories of loved ones he had lost. The realization shifted something fundamental in her perception. She was still a captive, still afraid, still desperate to return to her father. But she could no longer see Mtawanagi as the monster she had been taught all Indians must be. When he finally withdrew his hand and walked away, Emma released the breath she had been holding. Her hands trembled as she finished filling the water bladder, and she noticed Winona standing near the tree line, watching with knowing eyes. That evening, as they prepared the meal together, Winona spoke more freely than she had before. "Bear Ghost was the fiercest warrior of our people," she said, her hands moving rhythmically as she ground corn. "When his wife fell sick, he rode for 3 days without stopping to find the medicine man from the northern tribes. But the sickness was too strong. When his daughter drowned in the river during the spring floods, something in him broke. He stopped speaking for many moons. Some thought he would walk into the wilderness and never return." Emma listened, her own hands stilling in their work. "How did he become chief if he was so broken?" "Because he came back," Winona replied simply. "He returned from his grief and led our people through the hardest winter we had known. He made sure every child was fed, every elder had warmth. He gave away everything he owned so that others might live. The people chose him because they saw his strength was born from his suffering. But his heart never fully healed. Until he saw you." The weight of that statement settled over Emma like a heavy blanket. She did not want this responsibility, this strange role as a balm for another person's wounds. She had her own grief for her mother, her own fears for her father's fate, her own desperate longing for home. Yet here she was, trapped in circumstances beyond her control, forced into proximity with a man whose pain called to something deep within her own scarred heart. 2 weeks had passed since Emma's capture, and the world she had known felt like a distant dream. The terror that had consumed her during those first days had not disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something more complex. She found herself observing the Lakota people with growing curiosity, seeing nuances she had never imagined possible. These were not the mindless savages described in the stories around settler campfires. They were people with families, traditions, humor, and heartbreak. Mtawanagi had begun to teach her his language. It started simply, he would point to objects and speak their names in Lakota, waiting patiently as she attempted to repeat the unfamiliar sounds. Water. Sky. Fire. Tree. Her tongue struggled with the pronunciation, and often her attempts made him almost smile, though the expression never quite reached completion on his solemn face. But he persisted with the patience of a man who had learned to measure time in seasons rather than hours. In exchange, Emma taught him more English words. He already knew some, she discovered, though he spoke them hesitantly, as if the language tasted strange in his mouth. Their lessons became a daily ritual, conducted in the quiet hours of late afternoon when the camp's activities slowed. They sat by the creek, far enough from others to work without interruption, close enough that propriety was maintained. During one such lesson, Mtawanagi brought something wrapped in soft deerskin. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small doll made of corn husks, its hair fashioned from strands of prairie grass dyed dark brown. Emma understood immediately, this had belonged to his daughter. Her throat tightened as he placed it in her hands, trusting her with something clearly precious beyond measure. "Sakala," he said softly, the word hanging between them like a prayer. "My little one." She had 7 summers when the river took her. She laughed like the wind through trees. She asked more questions than there are stars in the sky. His English was broken, but the emotion behind the words was perfectly clear. Emma felt tears prick her eyes as she looked down at the simple doll, imagining the child who had once treasured it. "I am sorry," she whispered, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "I am so very sorry for your loss." He nodded slowly, taking the doll back and rewrapping it with tender care. "You have golden hair like the sacred corn. When I see you, I remember good things before sadness came. Is this wrong?" Emma considered the question carefully. Was it wrong for him to find comfort in her presence, even if that comfort was built on grief and circumstance rather than genuine connection? Was it wrong for her to feel sympathy for her captor, to see him as a man rather than a monster? The lines between right and wrong had become impossibly blurred. "I do not think it is wrong to seek comfort," she said finally. "But I do not belong here. My father must believe I am dead. He will be suffering just as you suffered when you lost your family. Can you not see that by keeping me here, you create the same pain in others that you have felt yourself. Mtawanagi's expression darkened, and for a moment Emma feared she had pushed too far. But when he spoke, his voice was measured, controlled. Your father leads people who kill our buffalo until none remain. Who take our lands and give us sickness. Who make promises in words written on paper and break them before the ink dries. Your people create much suffering for mine. Should I not be allowed small comfort in return? His words struck Emma like physical blows because she could not deny their truth. She had seen the massive buffalo herds from the wagon train, and she had seen how the men shot at them for entertainment, leaving the carcasses to rot in the sun. She had heard her father and other settlers discuss the Indians as if they were obstacles to be removed rather than people with rightful claims to the land. Shame burned in her chest as she confronted the ugly reality of her people's actions. You are right, she said quietly, surprising herself with the admission. My people have done terrible things. But I have not. I did not choose this westward journey. I did not shoot buffalo for sport. I did not want any of this. Her voice broke. I just wanted to honor my mother's memory by supporting my father's dream. Now I do not know if he is alive or dead, and I am trapped in a world I do not understand, torn between fear and something else I cannot name. 3 days after their conversation by the creek, a runner arrived at the camp bringing news that changed everything. Emma was helping Winona prepare hides when the commotion began. Warriors gathered in the center of the camp, their voices rising in heated debate. Winona's face grew tense as she listened, and Emma felt her stomach drop with dread. What is it? She asked, though part of her feared the answer. Your people are nearby. They search for survivors from the raid. They have many guns and threaten to attack our camp if those who were taken are not returned. Winona's hands stilled in their work. The council meets now to decide what will be done. Emma's heart leapt with hope even as terror gripped her. Her father was alive. He was searching for her, had not given up hope. But the thought of violence between the two camps, of bloodshed and death, made her feel sick. She stood abruptly, her legs unsteady beneath her. I must speak to them. I must tell them I am alive and well so they do not attack. She started toward the center of camp, but Winona caught her arm. You cannot interrupt the council. It is forbidden for women, especially captives, to speak when the warriors meet. The older woman's grip was firm, but her eyes showed sympathy. Wait. Mtawanagi will decide what is right. The waiting was agony. Emma paced outside Winona's teepee, her mind racing through possibilities. Would Mtawanagi let her go? Would he use her as a bargaining tool? Would he risk war with her father's group to keep her here? The thought that she had become a catalyst for potential violence made her want to scream. When Mtawanagi finally emerged from the council teepee, his face was grave. He walked directly to where Emma waited, and the entire camp seemed to hold its breath. Emma straightened her spine, meeting his eyes with all the courage she could summon. Your people come with many guns and much anger, he said in English, each word carefully chosen. They demand your return or they will kill many of us. The council says I must choose, give you back and accept their presence in our lands, or keep you and prepare for war. Emma's throat constricted. What will you do? He was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face as if memorizing every detail. Then he reached out and touched her hair one final time, his fingers moving through the golden strands with infinite gentleness. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I am tired of death. I am tired of grief. When I took you, I thought I could hold on to something bright in a world gone dark. But Winona tells me wisdom, holding too tight to what brings light only makes the light go away. He dropped his hand to his side. You will return to your father. I will tell my people there will be no war today. Relief and something surprisingly close to sorrow washed over Emma in equal measure. She had longed for this moment, dreamed of freedom and reunion with her father. Yet standing here, seeing the pain in Mtawanagi's eyes, she felt the weight of what this cost him. Thank you, she whispered. Then, acting on impulse, she reached up and unpinned the small locket she wore around her neck, the only possession from her old life that remained. Inside was a lock of her mother's hair and a tiny painting of her face. She pressed it into his hand. This was my most treasured possession. It holds the memory of someone I loved and lost. I give it to you freely, so you will remember that grief shared becomes lighter, and that sometimes captives and captors can see each other as simply human beings in pain. Mtawanagi looked down at the locket, then back at her. For the first time since she had known him, his expression softened into something approaching peace. You taught me your language, but you taught me more, that the color of hair or skin does not change the color of a heart. Go to your father. Live well. Remember that not all my people are your enemies, as not all your people are mine. The journey back to her father's camp was brief, accompanied by Mtawanagi and 3 other warriors riding under a white flag made from deerskin. When Emma saw her father, older and more haggard than she remembered, she leapt from the horse and ran into his arms. His embrace was crushing, his tears hot against her hair as he thanked God and cursed the Indians in the same breath. But Emma pulled back and turned to face Mtawanagi one final time. He sat on his horse, tall and proud, the locket she had given him already hanging around his neck. Their eyes met across the divide between 2 worlds, 2 peoples, 2 hearts that had touched briefly in the space between captivity and freedom. "Father," Emma said firmly, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd of settlers and warriors. "This man could have harmed me, but he did not. He could have chosen war, but he chose peace. We have much to learn from one another if we are willing to look beyond our fears and see the humanity in those we call enemy." In that moment, with the sun setting golden over the Dakota prairie, Emma Hart understood that she had been changed forever. She had entered the Lakota camp as a terrified captive and left it as a woman who had learned that courage means confronting your deepest fears, that wisdom means questioning what you have been taught, and that hope means believing that even between captive and captor, understanding can bloom like prairie flowers after rain.